Well, it is good this morning to have Andy Hill with us. Andy is the Associate Executive Coordinator of CBF North Carolina. That's a lot of words for a lot of title, and it's a lot of things that Andy does across the life of CBFNC, working with congregations, working with young leaders and college students, helping communities of faith think in new ways and exciting ways. He's been working with the Thriving Congregations Lilly Foundation grant in the life of our state in many different ways with many congregations. So it's many things that Andy does, and we're glad that he could be here with us. He served as pastor in congregations, including church planting in Clayton, North Carolina, served in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and in other places. Andy also serves a podcast host for CBF, generating many interesting conversations with faith leaders across the country. And again, he just has so many wide-ranging things that he does. Appreciate him being with us this morning at 9:30 in the workshop on authentic relationships and sharing again in that as well. He's married to Jennifer, 2 beautiful daughters, enjoys his coffee for sure. Mentioned that this morning. He's an outdoors guy, running, golfing, loves traveling to national parks as well. He's got a list of team commitments. Some of those team commitments we appreciate. Carolina Hurricanes is one that we appreciate. Duke basketball is one some of us appreciate. But there's a few others tucked in there that, he'll have to explain. But, when you grow up places, y'all have heard me talk about the Houston Astros, and not everybody loves that. Not everybody loves the New York Mets either, but Andy does, as well as a team in Alabama. And so, but we're just so grateful. Again, grateful to have him here. His work is good work, and his work strengthens churches across the state, including Temple. So, Andy, thank you for being with us.
Well, good morning. It's wonderful to be with you all this morning. For those that are still wearing your workshop stickers, congratulations. We got a special prize for you after today. Those that have took it off are kicking yourselves now. And y'all don't tell the choir what we gave out after they left early, the workshop. We want them to know we'll keep that secret. Barney, one of those dish pans I need to collect from you afterwards, so I just want to let you know. Thank you for coming and sharing this morning. It's quite powerful. Thank you. I don't know if you know this, but you have the best pastor in the state of North Carolina. Yes. Pastor Appreciation Month is in October, but when Randy's your pastor, you should just celebrate it each month throughout the year. He's a pastor's pastor. He mentors and models the way for so many. And so excited that he is joining and leading us in some networking around Welcome House in the state for the incredible model that you all have done here with Welcome House. So grateful for the time. And, anytime you get asked to preach the Sunday after a contentious election is always fun. So buckle up. Just kidding. I didn't want your anxiety to go through the roof already. The psalmist writes, "Turn to me and be gracious to me. For I am lonely and afflicted. Relieve the troubles of my heart and free me from my anguish." In 1986, Christopher Thomas Knight drove into the rural backroads of Maine. He parked the car in what appeared to be an abandoned service road. He left the keys in the car and disappeared into the woods. Let me settle your heart. This is not the story of a hiker gone missing or a tragic ending of someone's life where backpackers later find their body. No, Knight went into the woods for one purpose. He wanted to be alone for the rest of his life. Christopher Knight's harrowing story is captured in the best-selling story, The Stranger in the Woods. And for nearly 27 years, Christopher did not have a conversation with another person. Well, at some point in the 1990s, he came across a hiker who thought he was a hiker. They exchanged the cursory hi, and then they went on their separate ways. Knight was arrested in 2013 when he unknowingly tripped a silent alarm at a camp facility where he had went to collect some food items. What police didn't expect when they came across someone who had the lure of being called the Hermit of North Pond was a middle-aged man who spoke very well. The police were shocked to see him, and he was shocked to see the police. Obviously, Knight's intentions of being arrested and returning to civilization were not in his plans. He planned to live the rest of his life alone. And what might surprise you is that Christopher Knight is not alone. There is a growing body of research that shows that we are living in a pandemic of loneliness and isolation. A study released in 2023 by the U.S. Surgeon General declared that we are in an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. The National Academy of Science and Engineering and Medicine reports that 1/3 of adults age 45 and older feel lonely. Nearly 1/4 of adults age 65 and older consider themselves to be socially isolated. However, this is not just something for those that are in middle or older age. There is a growing amount of research that is showing that 79% of Gen Zs feel a report of being lonely. Millennials, 71%, and boomers reporting 50%. These numbers of isolation and loneliness are only getting worse. We went through the pandemic. We're experiencing all these things, and yet there is the paradox of we're living in the most highly connected society that's ever walked the face of the earth. We live in closer proximity together. We can exchange information online. I cannot see somebody from 30 years ago that I graduated high school with, but I can tell you what they had for lunch today. It's the weird place in which we live in, that we're in close proximity and yet we're not connected. Sociologists are trying to consider what factors lead to this feeling of isolation and loneliness within our culture. And there's a lot of things they can point to, but one of the major contributions is the erosion of social capital. In terms encompasses our social relationships, our shared values, our resources. Social capital is building points of connection, of trust and collaboration. And historically, social capital was built through things like neighborhoods and community organizations and faith and religious institutions, civic organizations and recreational leagues. But there is a challenge to the erosion of social capital due to things like individualism and the decline in trust in institutions. And so we must begin to understand is that while we are socially connected, we are being more isolated. In the places we used to go to feel connected, there's not a trust in those places. And for a while, for many, we think of the church as the answer. But for many people, the church is not a place of trust. It's not a place of connection. For many people, they see the church as a place of a growing number of contentious issues, including things like racism and sexuality and gender and other social justice issues, of mental health and bodily autonomy and political ideologies. For many, the church has been a place of building trust, while for others, the church has created a feeling of exclusion and isolation and rejection. There was once a circle of dots. They formed a community together, interconnected their lives with one another. When the dots were at their best, they interwove their lives together through beautiful and healthy relationships of mutual love and support and care. There was history among the dots as they shared many years and experiences. The dots all seem to believe the same things, hold similar ideological values and opinions about various matters. Most of them even had little dot children of their own, eventually growing up to form their own dot families of their own and expanding the dot circle community. But over time, other dots tried to enter into the dot circle. Most of the new dots were different than the other dots in the original circle. Some weren't as perfectly round, others being different shades, some holding different opinions, others coming from different communities, and some even made of dot families that were from different dot locations. However, some of the new dots had some challenges that were quite peculiar and unfamiliar to the original dot community. And for some reason, the new dots couldn't quite find a place within the circle, with some not even being able to enter altogether. Now, don't get me wrong. No one overtly said you're not welcome in our community. It was just, implied. And so most of the new and different dots, along with some of the original dots from the circle, they left. They would try to find another dot community elsewhere, while others would simply just venture off alone. Do you recall in the Gospels, Jesus takes the disciples across the Sea of Galilee when a storm suddenly approaches? The disciples were frantic, screaming in terror, believing they're going to die. Mind you, some of them were fishermen and had had experience at being out at sea when storms came. But something about this storm drove them to bellows of complete and utter terror. Meanwhile, what is Jesus doing? He's catching some Z's in the bow of the boat. And they have to shake him awake, and he wakes up, he calms the storm, he questions the disciples' faith, and then they get to the other side. And that's where our scripture picks up in Luke 8:26. It said they sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which was across the lake of Galilee. When Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes and lived in his house, but had lived among the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell to his feet, shouting at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torture me." And Matthew and Mark's version of the story, the man is chained up among the tombs of the dead. The Gospels describe him as a man filled with unclean or evil spirits. And upon seeing Jesus, the man shrieks. When Jesus demands to know the name of the evil spirits possessing the man, they cry out, "Legion, for we are many." The Gerasene demoniac has tremendous supernatural implications.
but equally it holds deep sociological, psychological, and physiological implications. A man who experiences utter emotional, mental, and physical torment is ostracized by his community, chained up and left to waste away. Yes, he has been battling demons, but his community piled on top of it extreme isolation and rejection and loneliness. When we were a kid, did you ever, or if you had preschoolers, did you ever have this song where you sing, I roll the ball to you, you roll the ball to me? It goes back and forth as children roll the ball to each other. And this repeats again and again. What happens when you don't roll the ball back to a toddler? Well, you've probably experienced that before. But sociologists wanted to see what happens in our brains when the ball is not rolled back to us. And in 2006, they released the studies in which he had adults hooked up to an fMRI scanner, which is scanning their brains while they're playing this game called Cyberball. Now, if you're a child of the 80s, we're not talking about the same Atari game. The game was simple. Players would throw a digital ball to the other player. And after a while, the researchers triggered the other players to stop throwing the ball to one particular participant. Not a big deal, right? Wrong. When connected to the fMRI scanner while playing the game, the players not receiving the ball began to feel strong feelings of ostracism and social exclusion and rejection and bullying and discrimination. All of these things from not being passed a digital ball. So what's happening consciously and subconsciously when we don't feel like we belong? Harkening back to our hunter-gatherer days, anthropologists argued that our bodies developed trigger warning systems of rejection because it quite literally meant the difference between life and death. To be ostracized from a community quite literally meant you were being sent out into the wilderness to be alone. And while we have developed as a society, our brains have not changed. When we feel that we are being marginalized or pushed to the side, our brain goes into overload with stress hormones telling us that we are not safe. As much as things change, they stay the same. And we have these hard feelings, and that's not just hard feelings in our brain. Physiologically, our bodies respond to loneliness in a radical way. A meta-analysis of different studies showed that a person's odds when they're feeling isolation and rejection and loneliness, their odds of an early death increase by 25 to 30%. Do I have your attention now? The threat of isolation, even momentarily, has lasting power. Research shows that the threat of connecting to others is more likely to lead to worse self-perception, lower performance, impulse behavior, shifting perspectives, feeling of hostility towards others. And over time, this builds and builds and builds, in which they said that it is just as bad for you to feel loneliness and isolation as if you smoke a pack of cigarettes every single day. That's the effects it has on our body. Research is showing that even babies will die if they don't feel a sense of empathy and compassion around them every single day. So it's not just that our body needs things like food and shelter and water. God made us to be in community with other people. We need to feel belonging in our lives. It's hardwired into how God created us. Returning to the story of the Gerasene demoniac, Jesus casts out the demon into a herd of pigs who subsequently run off a hill and drowned. Now, I know PETA-loving and bacon-loving people out there hate this story. There's tremendous implications between why the demons were cast into swine and the Hebrew people's abstaining from eating pork. But it says this in verse 38, the man from whom the demons had gone out begged him to go with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, return home and tell how much God has done for you. So the man went away and told all over town how much Jesus had done for him. This naked man was no longer bound by chains and demons. He begged Jesus to let him go with him. And wouldn't you? Wouldn't you, if your town and your family had pushed you to the side and literally chained you up among the dead? I would want to go with Jesus. But instead, Jesus commissioned the man to return to his town, telling them about God's incredible mercy. And Luke 8:20 reports that people were amazed by his message. When Jesus encountered isolation, a physically broken, emotionally challenged man, his response was to give this man a profound sense of belonging. This desire to belong is hardwired into our minds and our souls as part of our God-given fabric as human beings. And just in case you thought this was a fluke story of Jesus giving dignity, a sense of worth and inclusion to the family of God, just in Luke chapter 6 through chapter 8, where society and religious institutions and political ideologies drove people to a place of isolation, Jesus chose to give them a sense of belonging. The withered hand man, the leprous healed, the centurion's servant, the alabaster jar bearing woman, Mary Magdalene, and the bleeding woman. But a radical re-examination of the Gospels might open our doors to the reality that Jesus' pursuit is to give each person a sense of belonging. Encounter after encounter, we see that Jesus loves people. He includes people into the family of God, most of which were excluded by their society. So the church should be a city on the hill, the personification of belonging, if this is what Jesus did in his ministry. Yes, but we might also have an exclusionary problem. When asked what the most important factors of choosing a new or remaining in a place of worship, nearly 86% of those surveyed said feeling welcome was critical. Another study by the Barna Group in 2023 found that 71% of non-Christian Americans have a positive view of Jesus, while only having a 15% positive view of Christians. 89% believe that Christians do not protect the vulnerable. 25% believe Christians are hateful. 29% believe that Christians are sexist. 49% believe Christians are hypocritical. 48% believe Christians are judgmental. And 38% believe Christians are out of touch with reality. When you compile these staggering statistics with the studies of the religiously unaffiliated, who make up 62% of the American population, who identify themselves as no longer Christian, it's overwhelming and telling. And either all of these people's experiences are flat out wrong or inaccurate, or, hear me out, maybe the church needs to consider that it has an extraordinary problem. Often in quiet and unassuming ways, judgment leads to self-righteousness, and at worst, hatred and bigotry. Emotional and relational walls are built, doors are closed and locked, and it's not implied, maybe said, but unless you look like us or talk like us, you're not welcome here. And so people leave, and they find no place to belong. Something unexpected happened in the dot community. No one could quite particularly point to one thing, but more of a series of things that began to crack the facade of their exclusionary nature. Maybe it was the dot parents mourning the rejection of one of their grand dots. It could have been one of the dots who missed their old dot friend that was in a different dot community. Or surely they began to realize that their dot community was slowly getting smaller and smaller. But a dot elder brought everyone together for a dot town meeting, and everyone had their chance to air their grievances. The tension, anxiety in the gathering place could not have been any higher. But a funny thing happened. One by one, the dots began to share stories of how they too had felt rejected or looked down upon, the opinions they held, or what they lacked in personal appearances. The reality of the dot community's exclusionary nature sunk in, and they felt the weight on their shoulders, and everyone began to lament. The next day, a small act of kindness. One dot chose to invite a new dot over for dinner. On another occasion, an elderly Dot stopped watering their garden long enough to talk to that whippersnapper Dot with the wild hair. And before they knew it, the Dot community looked very different. It felt fuller and better and more beautiful. As Ellen Vora urged, if we really want connections in our lives, we need to allow for messiness that comes with community. People are challenging. They say the wrong things, can be careless and insensitive, but meaningful connections with people we love is also, at the end of the day, not just a biological imperative, but the bottom line for a fulfilling life.